divisional round of football, I had come up with 10 different plays for you guys to string in your parlays and hopefully help you make some money. And now we can see how I did. So first up, from the Chiefs and Texans game, the first thing I recommended was Travis Kelce over 0.5 touchdowns, and that indeed cashed with him scoring 1 touchdown. He really could have had 2 touchdowns in that game. He had a 49-yard catch and run, but he's too slow now, and so he wasn't able to bring that one in. But he still did hit the over, and that was a demon, so you should have made a little extra money if you did have that in your prize picks parlay. Next up, I had Travis Kelce and Dalton Schultz over 90.5 receiving yards. This one cashed, to the moon and back with 180, nearly double the initial line. Then I had Joe Mixon under 74.5 rushing plus receiving yards, and this was my first chalk of the weekend, and he finished with 100 yards. So, moving into the next game, the one between the Lions and the Commanders. In this game, I had Jahmyr Gibbs over 19 fantasy points, and this cashed with a total of 35.5. Then I had Jamison Williams under 23.5 yards for his longest reception, and this also cashed with 19. After that, I had Terry McLaurin over 14.5 fantasy score, that cashed with 18.7. Next, I had Olamide Zaccheaus 34.5 receiving yards, and this chalked with a whopping 0. He did not record a single catch. After that, I had Jayden Daniels over 29.5 passing plus rushing yards, and he cashed with 350. Then, heading into the Rams and Eagles game, I had just one prop, this being Dallas Goedert over 8.5 fantasy score, and this cashed with a total of 9.7. And finally, my only prop from the Bills and Ravens game was Justice Hill over 21.5 receiving yards, and he unfortunately chalked with 7. So that brought me to an overall of 7-3 on the weekend for the divisional round, which is quite a bit better than the first round where I went to 2-3-1. And overall, in this playoff, and in these playoffs thus far, I have now successfully bounced back to the positive with an overall record of 9-6-1. So I was talking about how if I didn't have a bounce back, I might have to accept that I am washed. But I guess we'll have to wait at least one more week before I make that declaration. So with my 10 picks last week, I have come back here again today for you with 10 new picks for this AFC and NFC Championship round of the NFL playoffs. And we're going to start off first with the NFC Championship game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Washington Commanders. The first player prop I have to suggest is going to be for Jalen Hurts. It's going to be his 190.5 passing yards under. Now, Washington's defense this year, their secondary in particular, ranks number 2 in passing yards allowed to opposing quarterbacks. And, the Philadelphia Eagles, they themselves were not that great at passing. In fact, they ranked in the bottom 5 amongst all NFL teams. I believe it was 4th place that they clocked in at. And so, Jalen Hurts, in this year compared to all years prior, he's throwing the ball at a unprecedentedly low amount. Even though this line seems like it's very little, it's under 200 yards, 190.5 yards. He hasn't come close to hitting this in either of his playoff games thus far. In Game 1, he had 131 yards against the Packers. In Game 2 against the Rams, he had 128 yards. It is not at all a given that he's going to be anywhere near this line. And in fact, in his last 6 games, he has only hit this line against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Other than that, he has 179 against the Rams, 118 against the Ravens, 108 against the Panthers. We will exclude the Washington game because he went down there, but then 131 against the Packers and 128 against the Rams. He just is not throwing the ball that much this year, and the Eagles are doing just fine without it, so I don't really see why they would switch up their game philosophy when they're this far into the playoffs. Especially against a stout secondary like the Washington Commanders do have. I don't think that they're going to try and test it. You've got Marshawn Lattimore, you've got the other guys whose names I'm not as familiar with, I'll be honest, but they're a good bunch of people, they're a good group. They don't allow that many passing yards, and I feel like the Eagles are going to recognize that. They're going to recognize that that's not how they've been winning games, and we're not going to see Jalen Hurts try and do anything too crazy. So I'm going to take the under on Jalen Hurts' 190.5 passing yards in this one. The next Philadelphia Eagle that I want to highlight is going to be, the most emphasized player in this game in Saquon Barkley. And the line that I am targeting for him is 127.5 rushing yards over. Washington, the Commanders' defense ranks number 27 in rushing yards allowed, number 26 in rushing touchdowns allowed, and number 25 in 20-plus yard rushes allowed to opposing running backs this season. And I don't know if you've heard, but the Eagles' offense was number 2 in the league for rushing yards per game, and that's in big part due to this guy on their team named Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley led the league in rushing this year with an average of 125.3 rushing yards a game, and if you include the 2 playoff games thus far, that average jumps up to 129.4. So upon first glance, you're going to see that line and think 127.5, that's ridiculous. But actually, it's not really. It's very doable for Saquon. And to add on to that, Saquon this year has had 30 breakaway runs, as in 30 rushes of at least 15 yards gained, and that ranked number 1 amongst all running backs in the league. And if we want to dive even deeper into it, the efficiency at which Saquon Barkley is rushing with this season is kind of absurd. The way that he is able to win against any number of people in the box. Here we have his formation-specific success, like how he did against specific formations. So a stacked front carry is when you have 8 defenders in the box. A base front carry is when you have 7, and a light front carry is when you have 6 defenders in the box. With 6 defenders in the box, Saquon averaged 5.8 yards per carry. With 7 defenders in the box, he averaged 6.2 yards per carry. And with 8 defenders in the box, Saquon averaged 5.1 yards per carry. Like, this is, I know Ashton John D, he was killing it for Boise State. A lot of people think that with what he was doing in college, he should have won that Heisman Trophy. Saquon is doing like the closest thing to an NFL equivalent of that. These numbers are absurd. 5.1 yards per carry as it is impressive. To do that against a fully stacked box is ridiculous. And so I don't think it really matters how Washington schemes their defense. They've talked about how it's going to take all 11 guys to stop Saquon Barkley, how that is their number 1 priority. I quite frankly don't think that they're going to be able to do it. In the 2 games against Washington earlier this year, Saquon had 146 rushing yards and 150 rushing yards. And I think all signs point to him doing it once again. So here, I'm going to take the over on Saquon Barkley's 127.5 rushing yards. Now, staying on that same topic of Saquon, another line of his that I like, that I will also be taking, is his 25 rushes over. You know, we've already established that Washington has a great secondary, and that Jalen Hurts hasn't thrown the ball all that much this season. So, when you think about those two things, it really does feel like the key for the Philadelphia Eagles to win this game has to be Saquon. And I think this is like, it's probably somewhat repetitive and it's probably somewhat obvious, but I have to reiterate the point. Like, I think Philadelphia fans, Washington Commanders fans, everyone watching this game knows that the Eagles are going to live and die by this guy, and I think he's just too good. I honestly think he's just too good. They're going to give him the ball over and over and over, and I don't think that the Commanders are going to be able to stop the run in this game. So I think that the Eagles, they're going to start running down their throats. They're going to have early success with it, then they're going to get a lead, and then they're going to have to waste time. So it's just going to be rush, rush, rush for the entire game for this Philadelphia Eagles offense. And honestly, in the event that they have a uncharacteristic turnover, or if they somehow fall behind, I still think that Saquon is the answer for how they get back in this game. So, though it is high, I'm going to target the over for Saquon's 25 rushes. Plus, he has hit or pushed this line in his last 4 games straight. So, the volume is definitely there. He's been doing it, and I think in a game like this, against an opponent that he has been able to have great success against this year, they're going to really lean on Saquon to lead them through this matchup. So I'm going to take the over on his 25 rushes. Now, the third Philadelphia Eagle and fourth prop that I'm going to recommend from this game is going to be one that targets A.J. Brown, and it's going to be his over on his 7 receiving targets. So, as I just mentioned, the Commanders are not an easy team to throw against this year, with their defense ranking number 1 in receptions and number 1 in receiving yards allowed against opposing wide receivers, along with number 6 in receiving. Oh, I totally messed up that note. Sorry. Number 1 in receptions, number 1 in receiving touchdowns, and number 6 in receiving yards allowed to opposing wide receivers. So obviously, that's not a great look for the Philadelphia wide receiver core production in this game. However, there is one thing that I think is important to consider about how the Commanders play their defense that could be useful to us. And so, when I was doing some research online, I found a very interesting stat that said the Commanders rank 29th in defensive EPA in man coverage versus 22nd in zone coverage. And this was something that they were saying in regards to the upcoming game between the Commanders and the Lions. Then I found another quote talking about how the Commanders run man coverage at about a league average rate. And then a different source said, sorry, this is sloppy. I'm not used to quoting random articles. I couldn't find hardcore stats on it. I wish I could, but I don't have Pro Football Focus Premium. But so I'm taking these people's words on it. Basically, the first source established that the Commanders play man coverage at a league average rate. The second source established that in the 2 games against the Philadelphia Eagles this year, the Commanders ran a cover 1 defense 52% of the time, which is man-to-man, and it was nearly double the rate of all their other games. So, on average, they run man coverage on average at the same rate as everyone else in the league, but in their games against Philly, they tend to go a lot more man than they do zone. Now, the reason why this is important is because A.J. Brown gets the ball thrown his way a lot more when teams are playing in man coverage. If we take a look at his zone versus man stats, we see that when it comes to his win rate versus man coverage and his target rate versus man coverage, there's some interesting points to be seen. His win rate versus man coverage is actually worse than that of his zone. He wins at 37% of the time against man. He wins 44.3% of the time versus zone. But when it comes to targeting, his target rate versus man, he gets targeted 35% of the time against man coverage, whereas he only gets targeted 18.7% of the time versus zone. And I think that intuitively makes some sense. If you got a big body wide receiver like A.J. Brown and it's man coverage, unless he's going super far down the field, where the cover one's going to help, you probably can get a really nice matchup for him. A lot of like jump balls, 50-50 balls, maybe on the sideline, or just have him run a good route. And so his 35% target rate versus man makes it. Jesus. I think I'm overcomplicating this. He's 5th best in the league when it comes to being targeted in man coverage. So I think one thing that these stats have showed is it's going to be hard for A.J. Brown to produce. Washington, they have a great secondary. They haven't been allowing a lot of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. They haven't been allowing a lot of production, yardage, anything to opposing wide receivers. But they do play a lot of man against the Eagles, and that is something that A.J. Brown excels in. I don't know about how much success he's going to have in terms of his production, but I think one thing that we can bank on for A.J. Brown is the fact that he's going to get 7 targets. I think that the way that their defensive scheme is more favorable for A.J. Brown to see the ball more. And obviously they don't pass all that much, but in the 2 games that the Commanders have played against the Eagles this season, A.J. Brown did hit that line in both of those games. He had 8 targets in the first game against the Commanders, and that was with Jalen Hurts in at quarterback. And in the second one, obviously Jalen Hurts was out. And so Kenny Pickett came in, but he also had 15 targets in that game. So, all in all, based on what I was saying, I think that I'm going to take the over on A.J. Brown's 7 receiving targets. Wow, what a mouthful. What a crazy prop, you know. Based on the way I was able to deliver that prop, consider that one a little more risky. Anyway, with that, I'm ready to move into our next prop from this game, and this is going to be the first one for the Commanders offense. Not really one that needs any explanation at all. This is Jayden Daniels over 0.5 passing yards. And this is just a prizepicks free promo square. So if you are doing your sports betting on prizepicks, compared to any other app, they have this promo for the 2 matchups tomorrow, and it's a gimme. He's gonna throw for 1 yard at least, unless he's Aaron Rodgers in his year 1 contract against the Jets. It's almost a guarantee that Jayden Daniels will get 1 yard. So this is one that I'm obviously gonna recommend, and one that you can obviously rely on hitting. So yeah. And with that, I conclude all of my picks for the NFC Championship game. We can now move into the AFC Championship game. And the first prop that I'm going to recommend from this matchup is going to be one for Josh Allen's 49.5 rushing yards over. So this season, Kansas City has had a passing defense that's been very solid, ranking number 8 in passing yards allowed and number 1 in passing touchdowns allowed. However, they haven't been quite as successful at stopping rushing quarterbacks. As we can see, they rank number 23 in rushing touchdowns allowed to opposing quarterbacks and number 19 in rushing yards allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So, through the air, they're pretty good, but on the ground, a little less impenetrable is the word that we're going to use. And luckily for the Bills, they've got one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the league in Josh Allen. Josh Allen's rushing yard line is set to 49.5 for this game, which he has cleared in the matchup against the Chiefs earlier this year. In that game, he got 55 yards on the ground. And in fact, if we expand this and take it back to his last 7 matchups against the Chiefs, he has hit this line in 5 of his last 7. And if we want to focus specifically on just the Bills and Chiefs playoff matchups in the postseason, when has he done this? He's done it in all 3 out of 3 games. So I really like his odds for doing it once again in their 4th postseason matchup. Not to mention, last week, the Chiefs allowed an injured C.J. Stroud to rush for 42 yards. That was the 3rd most for C.J. Stroud ever in his career. And, C.J. Stroud is no Josh Allen when it comes to rushing. So, I'm going to take the over on his 49.5 rushing yards. And staying on the topic of Josh Allen, there is another line of his that I think is, juicy, you could say. And that's going to be his 0.5 rushing plus receiving touchdown over. In the last 2 years, the only man in the league with more rushing touchdowns than Josh Allen has been the tush-push connoisseur himself, Jalen Hurts. We see that Jalen Hurts in the last 2 years is at 34 rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen is right behind him at 32 rushing touchdowns. Both of these guys, quarterback beasts, obviously Jalen Hurts has the tush-push. Josh Allen just gets in there. Pause. Anywho, the Chiefs, we mentioned that their defense is number 1 in passing touchdowns allowed, but I don't think they're going to be able to stop this Bills offense completely. To quote Denzel Washington, I do believe that Josh Allen is going to leave there with something. And so, if we take a look at the last 3 Bills versus Chiefs matchups, we'll see that Josh Allen has 4 rushing touchdowns in those 3 games. So, it's playoff football. It's all or nothing. These guys are hard to throw against. I think that Josh Allen's going to be running around a lot on the ground, and I like his odds to get into the end zone on one of those as well. So give me the over on his 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns. Now, next up in this game, I've got a prop for Kareem Hunt. This is going to be Kareem Hunt over 0.5 receptions. The Bills' defense so far this season has not been the best against receiving backs. They rank number 28 in receptions and number 28 in receiving yards allowed, and number 29 in receiving touchdowns allowed to opposing running backs. So, one thing that we know right away is this favors Kareem Hunt over Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco being more of their downhill runner, and Kareem Hunt, I would say, based on last week's game, this is more favorable for him. You could take a look at their roster and say Samaje Perine is the 3rd down back, but we didn't see him really get any minutes in last week's game against the Texans. And Kareem Hunt has more of an established history. He has more of a veteran status. with the Chiefs, and we've seen them favor him more than Pacheco in the last 4 weeks. Obviously, Pacheco injured early in the year. They had to bring in Kareem for their rushing game, and then after Pacheco came back, we saw his touches go up for a while. But ever since that Chargers game against the Chiefs, we've seen the Chiefs kind of shift back more in favor of Kareem Hunt. So, one thing to mention, this is a potential weakness that I tried to target last week in that Justice Hill prop, and it came back to burn me. I thought that he could hit the over on his 21.5 rushing yards, not rushing yards, receiving yards, and he finished with 7. So I'm going to take a more conservative approach to it. I'm going to go for the absolute most gimme line that I can come across, and I think that has to be the 0.5 receptions for Kareem Hunt in this game. It's currently a goblin in prizepicks, meaning that the payout odds are going to be slightly lower because it's not really a sweat. It's considered something that is easy. It's not even like a challenging line per se. They think that they're giving you like a slight discount almost. They're saying this is an easier line for something that's more likely to happen, so we're going to give you less money if you include it. So he just needs one catch to hit the over on this one, and I think that he has a pretty good chance of doing it just based on the fact that in 14 games that Kareem Hunt has played this season, he has accomplished this task in 12 of those games. That's a very high hit rate. So between his increasing workload in the last 4 weeks, an easy matchup against pass-catching running backs, and a strong history this season, I'm going to take the over on Kareem Hunt's 0.5 receptions. And with that, we move into our final player that I'm going to recommend in this game. This is a guy that I always turn to in the playoffs because he always turns up, he always produces. This can be none other than Travis Kelce, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. And the first prop that I'm looking at for Travis Kelce is the over on his 16 fantasy points. Now, Travis Kelce, even though he has had a down year this past year, always turns up in the playoffs. Is something that I mentioned last week, and we saw it happen right before our eyes. I talked about how in the playoffs, Kelce averages 8 catches for 89 yards. I think it was 9 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. And that's why I took the anytime touchdown on him. That's why I took the Dalton Schultz receiving yards combo. And it worked out. Travis Kelce last week, even in a down year, in that divisional game matchup against the Texans, he had 7 catches for 117 yards and a touchdown. That comes out to 24.7 fantasy points. And so you might be looking at the 16-point fantasy line and thinking, man, that's kind of steep. I don't know if I'm feeling him. If we take a look at Travis Kelce's playoff history, in his last 15 playoff games, understand that 15 playoff games is nearly a whole season worth of playoff games. He has cashed on 14 of those games. The one time in the last 15 games that Travis Kelce did not have more than 16 fantasy points was in a matchup against the Miami Dolphins, where he had 10 targets, but only 7 catches for 71 yards, so he had 14.1 points. He missed it, but he still had the opportunity. He had 10 targets in that game. I think the amount of volume and the amount of production that Travis Kelce sees in the playoffs is just unreal. It is unreal. And if you want a more focused approach, maybe you don't want to just look at his overall playoff history, but his opponent. In his last 8 games against the Bills, Travis Kelce has also hit this line 6 of the last 8 games. So I think that his reputation in the playoffs is just has that reputation for a reason. There's a whole reason why he is regarded the way he is regarded. Travis Kelce in the regular season, yeah, great. In the playoffs, he really does turn into someone else, even in the last 2 years, where in the regular season he has not looked nearly as dominant, nearly as unstoppable as earlier parts of his career. Come playoff time, he is just as good as ever. So, also, last week, in the 49-yard catch and run, I want to say he got stopped at the 4-yard line. He very easily could have had another 6.4 points. I think, like, it depends. Obviously, I'm not going to project that into the future because he has gone slower. But he was close to another touchdown performance for him. He had a very nice game, and I think he's going to do it once again. So I'm going to take the over on Travis Kelce's 16 fantasy points. And if you still aren't sold, if you still think that 16 points is too much, you've seen too much of Travis Kelce this year dropping the ball, maybe you had him in fantasy and he just wasn't doing it for you, an alternative line that I might suggest is the Travis Kelce, Khalil Shakir combined 125 receiving yards combo, and I would take the over on that. So Travis Kelce in the playoffs, he does average 89 yards a game. He got well over that last week. But if we just take his average of 89 yards a game, what does that mean? It means that Khalil Shakir needs to get 40 yards in this game to make this combo worthwhile. Now, Khalil Shakir is the leading receiver for this Buffalo Bills offense. And so far in these playoffs, he has gotten not just 40, but 60 plus yards in the 2 playoff games. Plus, if we want to take a look at Khalil Shakir specifically against the Chiefs, he has been that next guy up. Last year, Stephon Diggs did not show up in that game. It was a huge disappointment, and now Stephon Diggs isn't even on the team for the Bills. But if we take a look at the last 2 games for Khalil Shakir against the Chiefs, he had 44 yards and a touchdown last year in that matchup when Diggs was on the team. And in the first matchup against the Chiefs this year, where Diggs was no longer on the team, Khalil Shakir had 12 targets, 8 catches, and 70 yards. So this is the guy. This is the go-to guy for the Bills. We've got the go-to guy for the Chiefs and Travis Kelce. Both of these guys are ballers, and they're both going to step up in this situation. I think I would absolutely like to take the over on their 128.5 receiving yards combo. And with that, we've got everything. That concludes all 10 of my player props that I'm going to suggest in this round of the playoffs, the AFC and NFC Championship. Once more, for your convenience, I've got Jalen Hurts 190.5 passing yards under. I've got Saquon Barkley 127.5 rushing yards over. Got Saquon Barkley 25 rush attempts over. I've got A.J. Brown 7 receiving targets over. Got Jayden Daniels over 0.5 passing yards. Then Josh Allen over 48.5 rushing yards. Josh Allen over 0.5 rushing and receiving touchdowns, or anytime touchdown. Kareem Hunt over 0.5 receptions. Travis Kelce over 16 fantasy points. And Travis Kelce and Khalil Shakir 128.5 receiving yards combo over. So those are the 10 player props I've got for you this week. And I hope that these are able to generate some profit, some revenue for you. I was warned by people in the comments that I should make it clear that this is for entertainment purposes only. This is not financial advice. This is just for your relaxation and entertainment. And if you do choose to pursue any of these player props, it could be very good for you, but it also could be very bad for you. I don't know. as the playoffs and year progress. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you